Welcome you to another deep dive. Today, we are taking a close look at a single, incredibly significant Hebrew word. It really paints a picture of undoing, dismantling, and maybe even breaking barriers. It's a word that appears throughout the Old Testament, often revealing God's hand in world events. And this deep dive is framed by reformed thinking, which, well, it gives us a lens for understanding God's sovereign hand in all these things.
That's right. We are dissecting the verb haras. Now, at first glance, it might just bring to mind simple destruction, smashing things, but our sources reveal so much more depth. Our mission, as always, is to really pull out the most insightful points, giving you a shortcut, if you will, to understanding this concept in its full biblical context. We want to grasp not just what it means, but why it carries such weight in the biblical narrative, especially as it relates to God's purposeful action in the world.
Okay, so let's start right there at the ground level. When you hear haras, what's the first image? What's the most basic visual it conjures up? Before we get into the deeper layers, what's that fundamental sense our sources point to?
Well, the fundamental sense of haras is indeed physical. It's about tearing down, demolishing, destroying. Imagine a wrecking ball hitting a building, maybe, or workers systematically taking a structure apart piece by piece until it's just rubble. It applies most commonly to tangible things, structures built by human hands. Our sources are pretty clear that this is the primary active meaning. It's about bringing something that was standing down to the ground, pulling it apart, making it useless.
Okay, physical demolition. And are there specific types of structures the Bible uses haras for? Can you give us some concrete examples, something to really bring that visual to life for us?
Oh, absolutely. The Bible uses haras in very specific, often quite vivid ways. It paints these pictures of demolition. A frequent target, you could say, is altars.
Altars, okay.
Yeah. For instance, think about Judges 6.25. You've got Gideon, and he's under divine instruction, commanded specifically to tear down, there's our word, haras, the altar of Baal that belonged to his father. And this wasn't just, random destruction. It was a direct, purposeful act against idolatry.
Right.
It was about dismantling a physical center of false worship. It signified a clear break from compromise, getting rid of practices that offended God. We also see it in 1 Kings. Altars are mentioned as being torn down or just being in a ruined state. Think of Elijah rebuilding the altar of Yahweh in 1 Kings 18.30. That was an altar that had been torn down, presumably because of the prevailing idolatry. Or later, the Israelites, they get fired up with zeal and they start tearing down the altars of Baal themselves in 1 Kings 19, verses 10 and 14. So these aren't just physical acts. They carry huge spiritual and theological weight.
Yeah, it's clearly more than just knocking over stones. It's about dismantling worship systems, a kind of spiritual cleansing, isn't it?
Precisely. And the scale of what haras can demolish, it really expands far beyond just one altar. The word gets applied to much larger constructions. City walls, for example.
Walls.
In Ezekiel 13.14, the prophet talks about this flimsy, poorly built wall representing false prophecy being torn down by a storm. It signifies how unstable those false hopes are.
Yeah.
We see it again in Ezekiel 26.2, used in the context of Tyre's destruction. It says her walls will be torn down and cast into the sea. That picture suggests complete and utter ruin.
Wow, into the sea. That's thorough.
It really is. And haras also describes the destruction of entire cities. Look at 2 Samuel 11.25. King David's general Joab is reporting back, basically saying, the sword devours one as well as another, and cities get overthrown or torn down. That's haras again. Or 2 Kings 3.25 recounts how Moabite cities were torn down in battle. Isaiah 14.17 talks about a tyrannical king who overthrew cities, same word, and wouldn't let his prisoners go home. Micah 5.10, 1 Chronicles 20.1, it appears when they're attacking and overthrowing Rabbah, a major city. So the scope is just immense. It goes from a small cultic site right up to an entire urban center. This isn't just partial damage, it's talking about a complete undoing.
That really is a complete undoing. An entire city just gone. It paints a picture of total demolition.
That's right. And it can even extend down to individual houses.
Yeah.
Now, Proverbs 14.1 uses it slightly differently. It talks about a foolish woman tearing down her own house.
Right, I remember that one.
Yeah, and that instance leans more towards the metaphorical sense, domestic ruin caused by her actions. We can circle back to that later.
Yeah.
But the literal idea of dismantling a dwelling is definitely there in the core meaning. It also shows up with strongholds and towers, crucial defensive structures back then.
Makes sense.
Micah 5.10 talks about strongholds being overthrown by God's judgment. Lamentations 2.2 mentions strongholds being destroyed in divine anger. Ezekiel 26.4 speaks of the towers of Tyre being torn down as part of its predicted devastation. So you get this clear sense of overwhelming force, whether it's military action or divine judgment, just leaving nothing standing. And what's really interesting, linguistically speaking, is how the sound of the word itself seems to echo the meaning.
Oh, so.
Well, our sources point out that the primary sound, the haras, it's described as possibly onomatopoetic.
Like the sound imitates the action.
Exactly. Imagine the sound of something being forcefully pulled apart, maybe a tearing or ripping noise. The word itself seems to carry a raw, almost visceral quality, as if the sound mimics the action of pulling something down hard. Think about similar sounds in other languages, maybe Greek riso or German reißen. They carry similar ideas of tearing, breaking apart. It suggests this kind of raw action is understood quite fundamentally. And it has relatives in other Semitic languages too, like Moabite and Old South Arabian have krush. Tigre has hara, all meaning something like attacking or breaking into pieces. Arabic harasa means to bruise or tear up. So this isn't just some isolated Hebrew idea. It resonates across related languages, reinforcing that basic sense of forceful undoing.
It's really captivating how the sound can carry the sense of the action like that. It grounds the word in something almost tangible, almost audible. Now, you mentioned something earlier. What's really striking is how haras is often set against another action, especially when God is the subject. Can you tell us about its direct opposite? And what does that contrast reveal about God's dealings with the world?
Yes, that contrast is absolutely key. Haras is frequently presented in a clear antithesis, a direct opposition, to the verb banah.
Banah, man.
Banah means to build or to establish. And this contrast isn't just a linguistic quirk. It's a really central concept for understanding haras. It gives us much deeper insight into its theological weight. See, it's not just destruction happening in a vacuum. It's destruction viewed in relation to creation, to building, to establishing things. It sets up this powerful duality of divine action.
So it's not just about things being undone randomly, but about a deliberate reversal of the building process. That duality is, well, it's a compelling idea.
Precisely. And the scriptures often depict God as sovereignly capable of both building up and tearing down. From a Reformed perspective, this isn't arbitrary. It's purposeful. It points to his comprehensive oversight, his absolute authority over everything. For example, Jeremiah 42.10. It offers a promise, I will build you and not tear you down.
Huh?
This is God declaring his desire to restore, to establish his people securely after exile and judgment. It's a promise of future stability, of growth. But then, conversely, look at Jeremiah 45.4. God states his intent in a different situation. Behold, what I have built I am tearing down, and what I have planted I am plucking up, that is, the whole land.
Wow, quite the contrast.
It really is. And it reveals his hand in dismantling what he previously constructed. Maybe because of disobedience, maybe as discipline, or maybe as part of a larger redemptive plan he's working out. It shows that even what he builds is subject to his judgment, if necessary. And Jeremiah 1.10 and 31.28 illustrate this pairing powerfully too. In Jeremiah 1.10, God tells the prophet, see, I have set you this day over nations and over kingdoms to pluck up and to tear down, to destroy and to overthrow and to build banah and to plant.
Both sides of the coin right there.
Exactly. A complete picture of God's overarching oversight. Destructive actions and constructive actions. It's the full spectrum of his activity in history. Similarly, Jeremiah 31.28, which is a promise of restoration after judgment, says, and just as I have watched over them to pluck up and break down, to overthrow, destroy haras, and bring harm, so I will watch over them to build banah and to plant, declares the Lord. It clearly sets haras within this larger divine narrative. Judgment often precedes restoration. Psalm 28.5 makes a really stark statement about those who ignore God's works. He will tear them down and not build them up.
No rebuilding there.
No. In that case, it signifies finality in judgment. The tearing down isn't followed by reestablishment for those specific people. And Malachi 1.4 puts it so succinctly. Though Edom says, we are shattered, but we will rebuild the ruins, the Lord of hosts says. They may build banah, but I will demolish. Haras. That just underscores divine prerogative, doesn't it? Human efforts to build, especially if they're defiant towards God, can be completely nullified by God's will to demolish. It's a clear declaration of who's ultimately in charge.
That's a powerful picture of who holds the ultimate authority, yeah, regardless of human ambitions. And this duality, this building versus tearing down, it isn't just about physical structures, is it? You mentioned Proverbs earlier. It seems like haras works against the idea of establishing in broader ways, too, like in society.
That's absolutely right. It goes way beyond physical construction. Haras also signifies the overthrow or the ruin of countries, of kingdoms, and that's the direct counter to establishing them. Take Proverbs 29.4 again. By justice a king builds up, establishes, implied, the land. But a man who takes bribes tears it down. Haras. Here, a just king establishes, builds up the land through righteousness. He ensures stability, prosperity. But an unjust king, he tears it down, he destroys it. Not necessarily by knocking down buildings, but through corruption, bad policies, injustice. Things that lead to societal decay and ruin. So in this sense, a kingdom is like a building. It can be established by good governance, or it can be subverted and destroyed by wickedness. It's about undermining order, stability not just physically, but institutionally, morally.
Got it. So it's about leveling something, whether it's a wall or a system of justice.
Exactly. The term implies leveling, the opposite of setting something upright, erecting it, both physically and institutionally. When a society gets torn down by injustice, its very foundations are compromised. And yes, it applies to individuals too. Ousting someone from a high position, like we see in Isaiah 22.19 with Shebna, he gets cast down from his office as steward. That's haras. It's the complete opposite of establishing someone in that role or elevating them. It's a dismantling of their social or political standing, an unmaking of their public presence, their influence. This really highlights God's sovereign control over leadership, over societal structures, just as much as his control over physical buildings. He brings down the proud, he elevates the humble, all according to his will.
It's really compelling to see God's hand in both processes, the building up, the tearing down. For those of us looking at this through a Reformed perspective, what does this constant interplay of haras and banah, this tearing down and building up, what does it really reveal about God's character, how he deals with the world?
Well, this consistent duality, it really highlights God's absolute sovereignty over everything, creation, judgment, all of it. He doesn't just, permit things to happen. He actively orchestrates both the building and the dismantling. And crucially, from a Reformed viewpoint, he always does this according to his wise and just purposes. It means that even events that look purely destructive aren't chaotic. They're not outside his control. They are purposeful acts within his overarching plan for his creation, for his people. It gives us a lens, doesn't it? To view history, to view divine pronouncements as part of his grand design, even when they involve significant destruction. It assures us there's divine intention behind every undoing. Maybe it's to punish sin, maybe it's clearing the ground for something new, maybe it's bringing about his ultimate redemptive purposes. It's a declaration that God isn't just watching, he's the active orchestrator of history.
Okay, so haras clearly isn't just about knocking down literal walls. Where else do our sources show this concept working? In more abstract ways, figuratively. It sounds like it stretches far beyond just physical demolition into the very fabric of life itself.
That's absolutely right. The reach of haras extends well beyond the literal and tangible. It's frequently used metaphorically, for instance, to describe the complete ruin of a nation or a country. And God is often the agent doing the haras in this context. Look at Jeremiah 24.6. God declares regarding the exiles, I will set my eyes on them for good. I will bring them back to this land. I will build them up, banah, and not tear them down. Here, tearing down refers to the entire nation being uprooted, exiled, losing its identity, its stability. In Jeremiah 31.28, that promise to build and plant comes after a period where God watched over them to pluck up and break down, to overthrow, destroy haras, and bring harm. That clearly shows a comprehensive national ruin preceding renewal. And Psalm 28.5, as we heard, talks about God tearing down those who disregard his deeds. That signifies their utter undoing as a people or a group. This really speaks to divine judgment on a national scale. The very fabric of a society, a political entity, gets dismantled, not just its buildings.
This is a powerful image, not just a building, but an entire nation coming undone. Its very existence sort of shattered.
Indeed. And it's also used for overthrowing adversaries, enemies. Yeah. Exodus 15.7, the song of the sea after the Red Sea crossing. It describes God overthrowing Haras's enemies with his mighty power.
Right.
It demonstrates his justice against those who oppose his plans, his people. It's about disarming them, neutralizing the opposition, bringing about their downfall. We also see it applied to the downfall of leaders.
Yeah.
Proverbs 29.4, again, the unjust king destroys Haras the land, not by tearing down walls, but through corrupt governance that undermines the kingdom's stability and prosperity. His actions bring ruin.
Okay.
And building on that, it can signify the loss of status. We touched on Isaiah 22.19, Shebna being cast down, Haras from his high office.
Right, the steward.
Exactly. It's not a physical tearing down, but a social, a political dismantling. He's removed from influence, authority, public standing, his reputation, his position, just undone.
So the word really captures the essence of undoing, doesn't it? Whether it's a physical structure, a nation's stability, or even a person's social standing, it's about a complete reversal of what was established.
And it goes even deeper. It could reach right down into foundational concepts. At a conceptual level, haras applies to the ruin of foundations. The Hebrew word is yesedeth, and base is shathath. You find this in places like Ezekiel 30.4 and Psalm 11.3.
Foundations.
Yeah. In Ezekiel 30.4, God declares he will destroy Egypt and tear down her foundations. This signifies dismantling fundamental stability, whether that's society, politics, maybe even the created order itself. And when Psalm 11.3 asks that piercing question, if the foundations are torn down, haras, what can the righteous do?
That's a heavy question.
It really is. It's asking about existential stability. It's not just about a building collapsing, but about the very bedrock of what we rely on, societal justice, truth, maybe even our personal grasp on reality being shattered. When foundations are compromised, everything built on them becomes unstable or just collapses. It even reaches into the domestic sphere. Proverbs 14.1, the foolish woman tearing down her own house.
Right, we mentioned that one.
It's not literal demolition. It's through her poor choices, maybe gossip, quarreling, lack of wisdom. She causes domestic ruin. Her behavior undermines the peace, the order, the stability of her home. She effectively brings it down from the inside out, piece by piece.
That really brings it home, doesn't it, in a very relatable way. It shows how widely this concept applies beyond just grand historical events.
It certainly does. And it can even pop up in descriptions of vivid, figurative violence.
Yeah.
Like in Psalm 58, verse 6 in English, verse 7 in Hebrew. It's used to describe violently breaking away or knocking out teeth. Break their teeth in their mouths, O God. Tear out, haras, the fangs of the young lions, O Lord.
Oof, that's strong imagery.
It is a very visceral image of disarming an opponent, disabling them, taking away their power to harm. So this broad range shows how haras portrays a whole spectrum of undoing, from huge national judgments down to intimate personal consequences. And often it reflects a deliberate act of dismantling.
Okay, there's one more usage you mentioned, I think. It seems less about destroying something completely and more about a forceful movement. A penetration, maybe. What's this breakthrough meaning, and how does that fit in?
Ah, yes. That's a perceptive observation. This is indeed a distinct and important usage of haras. In an intransitive sense, meaning the verb doesn't take a direct object, haras can signify to break through or to break in. This usage doesn't always imply the barrier itself is totally demolished. It's more about a forceful passage through it. And crucially, it often carries this clear sense of lacking authorization, of crossing a forbidden boundary. It's about violating a set limit.
So it's not necessarily about annihilating the barrier, but about getting past it without permission. That's an interesting nuance. It suggests transgression, maybe, rather than just pure destruction.
Precisely. Transgression is a good word for it. The key examples are in Exodus 19, verses 21 and 24. Remember when the Israelites are at Mount Sinai?
The giving of the law.
Right. And they are sternly warned against breaking through haras to the Lord to go up the mountain. God had set explicit boundaries around Sinai, declared it holy, off limits to the people. His command was clear. Do not break through haras to look upon the Lord, lest many of them perish. Their breaking through wouldn't have been, tearing down a physical fence necessarily. It would have been an unauthorized intrusion into sacred space, a violation of a divine command. It really speaks to the seriousness of approaching God's holiness without proper reverence, without that sense of holy awe, or without the specific permission he gave.
So it's about respecting divine boundaries.
Yes. This sense of haras still involves a kind of disruption, maybe a tearing through a boundary, but the focus is on penetration, on violation, rather than complete demolition. It really underlines the concept of divine order, the sanctity of certain places or moments, and the severe consequences of ignoring God's clear instructions. For you, the listener, it brings this specific visual. A boundary, a line drawn by God, and the forceful, unpermitted act of crossing it. And that carries significant theological weight, especially in a narrative that emphasizes God's holiness and humanity's need for mediation. It's about respecting that divine demarcation.
Okay, that adds another layer entirely. Now, Hebrew verbs are famous for their grammatical forms, the stems, which add specific nuances, allowing for incredible precision. How does haras appear in its various stems, and are there related nouns that help us get a fuller handle on its meaning? This usually deepens our understanding quite a bit.
You're absolutely right. Looking at the grammatical forms and the derived nouns really unlocks the full semantic range of haras. It's like seeing the word from different angles, revealing just how multifaceted it is. Let's start with the basic stem, the qual.
Okay, the qual.
Think of the qual as the straight shooter of haras. It's the fundamental active voice. It conveys the direct, straightforward action to tear down, demolish, destroy, overthrow, break through, knock out. This is when someone or something is actively doing the destroying. Remember Gideon with his axe, taking out that Baal altar.
Yep.
That's pure qual action. It's deliberate. Or when God declares he will destroy haras, a city, like in Isaiah 14.26, that's qual. Even the intransitive to break through in Exodus 19.21, that's also a qual form, emphasizing the direct action of penetrating the barrier. It's the doing of the destruction.
So qual is the core action verb, the doing of the destruction or breaking through. What about the passive side, when something is being acted upon?
For that, we move to the nifal.
Handfall.
Right. If qual is the active punch, the nifal is where we see the impact of that punch. This stem tells us something is being torn down or has been laid in ruins. It shifts our focus from the agent, the one doing the destroying, to the state of what's destroyed, or the process of it coming apart. It focuses on the result, the recipient of the action.
So it's about the outcome.
Exactly. For example, Jeremiah 50.15 describes a wall that is in ruins. The nifal emphasizes its state. It's not about who tore it down right then, but the fact that it is torn down. Or Ezekiel 36.35-36 talks about cities that were destroyed, emphasizing their ruined condition. We also see it used for foundations being overthrown, like in Psalm 11.3, the foundations are destroyed, nifal. And Ezekiel 30.4, it signifies that fundamental collapse that has happened or is happening. Joel 1.17 speaks of storehouses being ruined. Even mountains in Ezekiel 38.20 are described using the nifal as being torn down. Remember Jeremiah 31.40, it uses the nifal proverbially. Something will not be plucked up nor thrown down. Nifal, meaning it will endure. So the nifal really shows us what happens to something when haras acts upon it, often highlighting the consequences, maybe of divine judgment.
That distinction is really helpful. It moves us from the actor to the result, the state of being ruined. And then there's the peel stem. What does that add to the picture of haras?
The peel stem. The stem is typically intensive or causative. For haras, it often signifies to utterly overthrow, ruin, or lay waste. It suggests a complete, forceful destruction. If qual is a punch, maybe peel is the knockout blow. It emphasizes the totality, the thoroughness of the demolition.
Utterly overthrow. Okay.
Yes. Our sources note it's used specifically in the context of utterly tearing down idols or false gods. Exodus 23.24 is a key example. The command isn't just to tear down, but to utterly tear down, haras and the peel, the images of their gods. This highlights a forceful rejection, a complete eradication of idolatry. Leave no trace behind. It also describes those who destroy or lay waste a city, like the destroyers of Zion mentioned in Isaiah 49.17. The verb there is peel, underscoring their active, complete role in bringing about the city's devastation. So peel isn't just about breaking something, it's about making sure it's absolutely, totally ruined. Thorough destruction.
So qual is the action, nifal is the state of being ruined, and peel is the intensive, complete destruction. That clarifies the verbal forms nicely. Are there also nouns derived from haras that give us even more insight?
Yes, absolutely. There are three important derived nouns that complement the verbs. They each add their own shade of meaning and enrich our appreciation for the whole concept. First, there's fo, here's. It's a masculine noun. It means overthrow or destruction. It points more to the act or the event of being overthrown.
Here's.
It appears notably in Isaiah 19.1. It talks about one of the 5 cities in Egypt that will eventually speak Hebrew and swear allegiance to God, being called the city of destruction, here's. Now, this is often explained as a clever play on words. It might be linked to city of the sun, haras, which was orange carrots, or Heliopolis. The idea is that its pagan identity, its temples would be destroyed, here's, spiritually and politically. It signifies this profound shift from idolatry to true worship. So here's points to the outcome, the state of being overthrown, often with that sense of judgment attached. Second, we have harisa. This is a feminine noun. It refers to ruin, but more in a concrete sense. It often denotes the physical remnants, the actual rubble left behind after something's destroyed.
Harissa, the rubble itself.
Exactly. Amos 9.1 is a key example. It refers to the ruins, harisa, of the fallen booth of David. And what's significant there is that in that very context, those ruins are then described as being raised up.
Ah, hinting at restoration.
Precisely. It hints at the possibility of restoration from the ruins. It's the pile of rubble left behind, yes, but it's a pile that holds potential for recreation. This is the tangible, visible aftermath of haras. And finally, there's gurugo, harasut, also a feminine noun. This one signifies overthrow, destruction, or ruin. But in a more abstract sense, it refers to the state of being ruined rather than the physical debris or the specific act. It captures the devastated condition itself.
For suit the abstract state.
Right. For instance, Isaiah 49.19 talks about the land of thine overthrow or thy ruined land, that's harasut. It refers to the devastated condition of the land, emphasizing the abstract state of desolation that results from destruction, a land that has suffered the consequences of being torn down. So these three nouns, here's the event state, harisa, the physical rubble, and harisut, the abstract condition of ruin, they really help us understand haras as an action, a state, and a physical result.
Okay, we've really dug into how haras functions in all these ways, physically tearing down, metaphorically overthrowing, breaking through boundaries, the grammar. But let's bring it back. Why does digging into just one Hebrew word like this matter for you, our listener? Why is it relevant for understanding the biblical account of God's ways? What's the wider takeaway here?
Well, I think understanding haras helps us grasp the full scope of God's sovereign operations. That's crucial from a reform perspective. He acts with clear intent, whether he's building up or whether he's tearing down nations, institutions, individuals. This isn't portraying God as causing chaos or being random. It shows purposeful action within his wise and just plan. It reinforces that understanding that God is actively involved in all aspects of creation and history. He's bringing about his purposes even through events that look on the surface like sheer destruction. It shows his hands are always on the controls. It also shapes how we understand human actions in the Bible. For example, it helps us see the destructive impact of unjust rulers, like in Proverbs 29.4. They can destroy, harass the land through corruption, bringing ruin through bad governance, not just military attack. But on the flip side, it highlights the commanded actions of individuals like Gideon in Judges 6.25. He was directed by God to dismantle false worship by tearing down, haras, that altar. It shows that human actions, whether they're wicked or obedient, can function as agents of haras under God's ultimate authority, sometimes fulfilling his permissive will, sometimes his directive will.
So it gives us a framework for interpreting both divine and human actions within the biblical story, showing how God works through both, or sometimes in spite of human actions.
Precisely. And furthermore, it really illustrates the comprehensive nature of divine judgment, and importantly, its stark contrast with God's work of establishment and restoration. The fact that its opposite, banah, to build, is so prominent means that when destruction, haras, occurs, the door is often being opened for God's new work. Even in the middle of haras, there's frequently that promise, or at least the possibility of banah, a divine rebuilding, a restoration that comes only after something has been completely cleared away. It suggests a purposeful clearing, you see, not just aimless demolition.
Clearing the ground for something new.
Exactly. So, for you as our listener, digging into haras offers a closer look at the intentionality behind seemingly destructive events in Scripture. It helps place them within God's overall plan for his creation, for his people. It reveals that God is at work in all seasons in the tearing down just as much as in the building up. It moves us past maybe a superficial understanding of destruction, allowing us to see it potentially as a purposeful tool in God's hands for his glory, sometimes for discipline, and ultimately often oriented towards new creation. It kind of invites us to consider, doesn't it? What might God be clearing away in history or even perhaps metaphorically in our lives in order to establish something more fitting to his eternal purposes?
Wow. Our deep dive into haras really reveals a word that is so much more than just destroy. It describes deliberate undoing, complete dismantling, forceful overthrow, even that breaking of boundaries. It's a word that truly speaks to God's sovereign hand in all things, revealing his active involvement in the unfolding of history and indeed the lives of his people.
And that consistent contrast with building, with banah, gives us such a fuller appreciation for the cycles, you could say, of divine action in the world. It reminds us it's not just about what's broken, but also about the space being created for what God is making new. It shows that even in ruin, there can be a promise of renewal, a clear sign pointing towards God's ultimate creative and redemptive purposes.
We certainly hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective on this powerful word. As you consider this multifaceted nature of haras, what does this concept of divine or human undoing make you consider? Maybe about the foundations in your own life or in the world around you. What might God be working to establish, or perhaps what might he be faithfully dismantling in order to build something new and lasting for his glory? Something to reflect on.